I'm Ashley Dvorkin for FoxNews.com. A new study by the U.S. Geological Society identifies states at risk for earthquakes within the next 50 years. And there are 42 states listed on this new map. So joining us now to explain these findings is Dr. Chris Goldfinger, professor of geology and geophysics at Oregon State University. Welcome.
Thanks, Ashley. Good morning.
Good morning. So first, can you tell us what this study is and how often it's conducted? And then let's get to that number of 42 states. I mean, I wonder if it's more than has been identified in the past.
Well, the U.S. Geological Survey does this update of the national seismic hazard maps every 6 years, typically. And what it does is compiles all of the changes that have happened since the last edition, which was in 2008. And tries to bring up to date both the research and all the things that have come to light in the last few years, so that people that are responsible for building codes and mitigation and so forth have the latest information.
And the 42 states now, is that more than has been identified in the past or put on this map? And then also the various degrees of risk that we're talking about, because obviously there's the high-risk states and then it goes from there. So explain that.
Right. I'm actually not sure if the number of states remained exactly the same as before, but the main thing is to bring up to date the levels of risk and the extent of the risk for those states that might be affected by earthquakes, and some relatively modest changes in those really throughout the country.
So let's focus on the West Coast first. What major changes did you see there?
Well, there are two main areas of focus. One is the Pacific Northwest, where we have the Cascadia Subduction Zone, and the other is California, where we have the San Francisco Bay Area, the San Andreas, Hayward Faults, and so forth, and then Southern California, where we have also the San Andreas, but many other faults in the LA Basin and San Diego area. And so changes, for example, in the Pacific Northwest, we had previously modeled single types of subduction zone earthquake, magnitude 9. Much like the earthquake in Sumatra and recently in 2011 in Japan, we'd modeled that type of earthquake as essentially focused on a single type of rupture that filled the entire subduction zone. And now the new report includes other smaller ruptures that occur in between the big ones. And so that adds to the hazard in the sense that we have more of them, even though the additional earthquakes are a bit smaller than the mega earthquakes they used before. And then the other big change is in California, the methodology has mostly changed to allow types of earthquake ruptures that weren't in the previous map. So, for example, very long ruptures that don't stop at barriers but jump across what were thought as barriers before are now allowed in the model, even though they may not have occurred in history. So those are two of the bigger changes.
Sure. And now you mentioned the Cascadia Subduction Zone. Can you, for those who may not know, explain where that is, what it is, and why it's a particular focus for you?
Right. The Cascadia Subduction Zone, a subduction zone is a plate boundary where usually an oceanic plate dives underneath a continental plate. It's the type of plate boundary that generates the largest earthquakes, the magnitude 9s, similar to Sumatra and our mirror image subduction zone in Japan. So I think everyone's familiar now with those types of earthquakes and the tsunami they generate, and we have one here in the Pacific Northwest that goes from Northern California to about the middle of Vancouver Island. Very much the same as Sumatra and Japan, and we've had the last earthquake that we know of wasn't in historic times, so it's not well known, but it occurred in the year 1700 when Native Americans were here. And so we're expecting an earthquake like that. We can't forecast it in any way, but we're working on probabilities of those earthquakes. But sooner or later, an earthquake, much like the Japanese earthquake, will occur in the Pacific Northwest and affect Seattle, Portland, and Vancouver.
And then what about some of the other areas of the U.S. On this map, like Virginia, where earthquakes aren't as frequent, but they can still cause damage? So where are some of those, and then in what capacity are those at risk?
Right. The eastern and central U.S. are in a completely different situation where the earthquakes are relatively small and relatively rare, but that doesn't mean that they're not at risk there. For example, the preparedness and level of building codes and so forth in those areas are very low to go along with the low known earthquake frequency. But if you were to have an even a moderate-sized earthquake, like the Virginia earthquake, if you were to have something like that in a place like New York City with no preparation at all, the risk would be very high, even though the earthquake might not be that large. So it's really a challenge for the USGS to come up with credible and reasonable scenarios that address that risk. So a good example is New Madrid area in Missouri, where there was several large earthquakes in the early 1800s. It's very controversial just how big those earthquakes were and how often they can happen. And so we're at the cutting edge of that research right now, and we really don't know. So the USGS maps try to address and make compromises between all of the opposing research that's out there on areas of the country that are difficult to discern.
Sure. And now it seems, of course, that our knowledge of earthquakes in general has increased, but you mentioned there's this short historical record. So just in the sense of going forward and being prepared, what are states doing? What is the nation doing overall compared to other countries as well to prepare? And any tips that you have for people that they can personally prepare?
Okay, that's a lot. I'll try to squeeze all that in.
It's a lot.
That's a lot.
But just in terms of, being prepared, because obviously we have this amount of knowledge, so what can we do going forward?
Right. So being prepared is the hardest thing, both in the science sense and in the personal. Well, in the personal sense, it's maybe one of the easier things. On the science side, you hit the nail on the head when you said time, because earthquakes and the Earth, those processes take a long time, and our historical and instrumental records are really short. So in Japan, the earthquake that happened in Japan has a repeat time of about 1,000 years, which actually fits in the Japanese historical record, but not in ours. Mm-hmm. So they were starting to realize that they might have an earthquake like that, and time just ran out for Japan. In the U.S., we have maybe not quite a severe problem, but it may be a case of we don't know what we don't know. So we're trying to push back the records using things like paleoseismology that get at things that are beyond history, so we can get an accurate record. So the worst case scenario is if we get hit by an earthquake where we had no idea that was possible. So the first goal is to get that right. And if we can do that, then we can start to mitigate, start to prepare for an inevitable earthquake, like in the Northwest or in Los Angeles, and make some headway on the things that we can do, the engineering, the education, all the mitigation things that have to come before an earthquake. And since we can't really forecast earthquakes well or at all of the effort goes into mitigation, education, and engineering, so that when it does inevitably happen, even though we won't have any notice, much like the Japanese, we'll be pretty well prepared. But the Japanese have maybe a 1,000-year head start on us in that area.
So interesting. Yeah. And, well, great. Well, obviously, that's what this study aims to do, to give more information. So, right. Dr. Chris Goldfinger, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
And you can find more on this study on foxnews.com. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Ashley Dvorkin.